Happy Friday, everybody. Thanks for watching the show, WND Live. We're here. And are you exhausted yet? Are you exhausted at the media narratives that are pumping at full speed? Kamala Harris is not a bumbling drunk anymore. She's a wildly loved presidential candidate that everyone is going to go out and see. Tim Walz, her Governor Tim Walz, her vice president to be. He's a great guy, Uncle Tim. Everyone's excited to know more about him, and we're going to tell you more about him. And it's barely even been a month since the Trump assassination. But when's the last time you heard about that? We're going to talk about what's really going on. And one really creeping thing is the idea that there's a real chance Kamala Harris could win, as terrifying as that is. And we're going to make that an alarming fact for you today. And let's bring in our guests and our panel. We thank you for watching. With us, as always, Elizabeth Farah, co-founder of WorldNet Daily, and Brian Ullman, contributing writer to WorldNet Daily. And our guest today, Ben Dorr, the executive director of the Minnesota Right to Life and Minnesota Gun Rights. I can't think of a better combination of things to be an executive director for.
All about life.
And I think I want to start us out. We're going to come back to Ben, but Brian has a great setup, an article that we have over at the website, and it's about Tim Walz. Is Tim Walz Minnesota nice? Anything but. Brian, can you kind of set us up briefly? What is this about?
Well, we have this image in our heads of what Minnesota's like. Like you think back to, say, movies like Fargo or writers like Garrison Keillor, and they're always been a little bit left-leaning, I'd say. Minnesota's, the last time they went Republican in a presidential election was Richard Nixon in 1972. But at the same time, it's always been a very nice version of leftism. We just want to help people out. We want to, provide medical care and, things like that, free public schools. And that's been this image that we've had of this state. But I think the last 4 years, and this is what I say in the article, that the last 4 years has really shattered that image. Folks need to remember that Minnesota was ground zero for the George Floyd riots. Had the governor, Tim Walz, nipped that in the bud, maybe it wouldn't have spread to all the other cities in our country. And not to mention his record. He admits to being essentially a socialist. He says one man's socialist is another man's, socialism is another man's neighborliness, saying that socialism is just being nice. But, is it really nice to have laws that say you can, abort your unborn child up until the moment of birth, or that the state can take your children away if they think that they are a different gender than what they are? It's a pretty terrifying dystopia when you really get down to it, but they're still trying to cloak it in this folksy, nice image, and I think people are seeing through it.
It's a great point. We're going to show this quick clip, and we'll come back and we'll discuss it. This is, and we want to remind everybody that, as Minnesota's burning, as Minneapolis is burning, Tim Walz is making excuses and saying that people are rightfully angry. Check it out.
What can you say to Minnesota? Are we going to be safe? Are we going to be okay? Are businesses going to go down? Your thoughts?
Well, it's my responsibility. I would tell Minnesotans that we are doing everything in our power to do that. And I want to hold those two truths at the same time. The folks you see out there at Brooklyn Center are in trauma, and they're rightfully angry at a system that does not serve them and puts black youth and people of color at risk. That is all absolutely true. We also know from experience in May there will be those that will exploit that.
I just noticed, guys, that in that interview, they're like sitting 12 feet apart. I forgot about that. Like, Elizabeth, quick, I'd love your take on that interview. And then we're going to go to Ben, who's going to actually tell us the ugly truth about all of this.
Well, how evil is it? Forget, the social distancing or whatever that was called. I never distanced from anything, but the fact that he would utter these two truths, that they have every right to destroy a city. I know he didn't say it that way, but that's exactly what he was confronting. A city being destroyed because of his inaction, but primarily because people were unhappy. And so that gave them the right, because they have concerns. They're worried about justice for Black Americans. But let's face it, This is never a legitimate reason, no matter how bad, for burning a city to the ground. How can he be so evil? And how could anybody hear that and not take away that this man is seriously morally disturbed? I mean,
Ben,
that's my take.
can you tell us more about the morally disturbed person that you know as governor?
I want to tag off of Brian right there. You know, one man's socialism, another man's neighborliness. You know, being neighborly is going next door and asking your neighbor if you can borrow a stick of butter, and your neighbor goes, well, sure, here's a stick of butter. Socialism is the government comes, takes the butter from your neighbor and gives it to the other neighbor. There's no world where that is neighborly. That is wrong. It's immoral. And that's what we lived under Tim Walz ever since he became governor in 2018. COVID was an absolute disaster. The George Floyd riots were an absolute disaster. And he has always been, and this is why I was very concerned when I found out that Tim Walz was going to be the running mate. A lot of people said, oh, this is a big blessing for Republicans. Oh, this is some no-name, governor from the Midwest. It's not Josh Shapiro. It's not, any of these people. It's some random guy named Tim Walz. Now, Tim Walz is the best, worst governor in the country. He is so good at putting on his red flannel shirt, which he pulls out every single fall for every single speech, every single hunting event. He is the quintessential folksy Minnesotan while passing the worst laws in the country and allowing absolute carnage to take place during the George Floyd riots. And he still sells it very well as being this guy. And he's anything but. The guy has been a tyrant as governor. The laws he passed have obliterated small businesses. It's the worst abortion laws in the world. He passed gun control, all the trans stuff. This guy is an absolute unmitigated disaster, which is why people are fleeing the state of Minnesota in droves and why the economy is tanking there. He's been an absolute mess.
So one issue about this, we know he's hyper woke and hyper liberal, but now stolen valor is at play. And of course, the regular media they can't ignore it. But we have a clip here where he's admitting, or he says claiming that he carried weapons of war. Let's show that.
Hope woke up like many of you did 5 weeks ago and said, Dad, you're the only person I know who's in elected office. You need to stop what's happening with this. I'll take my kick in the butt for the NRA. I spent 25 years in the Army and I hunt. And I gave the money back, and I'll tell you what I have been doing. I've been voting for common sense legislation that protects the Second Amendment, but we can do background checks. We can do CDC research. We can make sure we don't have reciprocal carry among states, and we can make sure that those weapons of war that I carried in war is the only place where those weapons are at.
That I carried
the red flannel. See the red flannel?
It's got the red flannel. It's great.
There's another kind of a small point, but it's related to this when he talks about being a veteran with disabilities because of his service. But let's just recall that, a really honorable man, somebody who's really been on boots on the ground in war, is not going to say the tinnitus or a little hearing loss from practicing at home in Minnesota or wherever he was stationed at home with artillery, that yes, he did receive some kind of disability because of that, a rather minor disability in the grand scheme of things. But he never qualifies it. He always leaves, this is like a deliberate omission, always leaves the reader or hearer to believe that he was wounded in combat. And he was not, obviously.
Let's see. What's interesting to me is I think most of us on the right will recognize that the left doesn't care about consistency or honesty or what's true. They just say whatever they want to say at any given moment to accomplish whatever their next goal is. And of course, the leftist media is trying to redirect this. They're trying to debunk the accusations of stolen valor by saying, well, he was able to retire. He filled out all the paperwork. He served for 25 years. And that's not what anyone on the right is saying is the problem. The problem is that he lied about it. He came back after not having seen combat and said he was in war. He used his provisional rank command sergeant major on all his paperwork and his campaign documents, even though because he left early, he did not actually retire at that provisional rank. And yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are saying, especially on the left, are saying, who cares? What's the difference? He served, you guys are making a mountain out of a molehill. But the issue is, does he have integrity? Does he have honesty? Did he serve because he felt it was the right thing to do, or did he end up just using that as campaign fodder for his political career? That people are talking about this being a swift boating 2.0, and the media wants you to believe that the whole swift boat thing against John Kerry in 2004 was made up as a way to just attack him, but it was not made up. It was true. He did lie about things. He did twist the truth. He did use his military service, as just part of his image for his campaigns, rather than just doing it because it was the right and honorable thing to do.
We have actually, in a rare case, we have a clip from CNN where CNN actually calls Walz's record to account. We're going to play that.
Walz did make a comment, speaking to a group, he's done it a couple of times, where he has used language that has suggested that he carried weapons in a fighting situation. As you know, with your contact with the military, I know from coming from a military family, there is a difference between being in a combat area, being involved at a time of war, and actually being in a position where people are shooting at you. There is no evidence that at any time Governor Walz was in a position of being shot at, and some of his language could easily be seen to suggest that he was. So that is absolutely false when he said that about gun rights out there.
Okay, so even CNN has got to bring this up, but this kind of perfectly leads us into all of the astroturfing is just louder than anything else. So we're seeing that for Walz and Kamala, the media machine humming to make us think that both of them are great. And these kind of random videos from CNN, they get washed out. Mm-hmm. And as the machine is at full volume. Elizabeth, I hear you thinking about this.
Well, I'm not as doomer as you are.
That's my
go
role
in
here,
and
yeah.
out of it. I do go in and out of it because there is nothing that they will stop at to win. And we know that there will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of illegal aliens, not migrants, illegal aliens voting in this upcoming election. That's just a foregone conclusion. The media is complicit. They were complicit in Dementiagate. Walz was an extraordinary choice by Harris, and I see God's hand in that, because could anybody be so stupid as to not pick someone who would counterbalance the most liberal senator in all of Congress? So I see that the Democrats, who are really leftists, Marxists, communists, or Islamofascists, and will do anything to win, but then I see God's hand obviously in the assassination attempt being foiled by the hand of God, and also for some of these bizarre things that she did, like choosing, I was so happy she didn't pick Shapiro, choosing Walz. So I don't know. I want to go back, though, and just make one comment about Walz's statement that, was very understandable that these people who are not being served because of the color of their skin in America. I can't imagine being the governor of the state of Minnesota and claiming that your own state is racist when it was liberal enough to vote for somebody like you. I believe racism is more on the left than on the right anyway, by far. But I'm thinking about all of the moms and dads and the extended families and the communities of little 12-year-old girls being gang raped for an hour or two and then strangled to death. I'm thinking about the mommies with 5 kids being raped and murdered, and the opioid victims' families. And I am wondering about the cognitive dissonance of anybody who says burning a city down because of Floyd, but it would be a terrible or an evil thing that anyone would do the same thing about these children and women who are being raped and murdered. They don't even understand the cognitive dissonance. So no, if we all rose up and started burning down cities because of the illegal invasion border plan by Biden, we would be rounded up and we'd be sitting in prison next to January 6th captives and being there for the next, 4 years. So, yeah.
It's, calling out the hypocrisy of the left has been something the right has done for ever since I've been involved in politics. It doesn't do any good because, they don't have standards. But consider that Governor Walz, when the COVID lockdowns came about, he instituted a snitch line so that you could call the government and tell on your neighbors if they had, too many people over, if you were out walking your dog without a mask or whatever. But then once the BLM, protests and riots happened, he's like, oh no, these guys have a good reason for being out there. So it's, several people always say that it's not hypocrisy, it's hierarchy. They believe that anything in the service of their, goal, their revolution, including burning down their own city, is legitimate and justified. But anything we do, no matter how peaceful, even if it's just going out without a mask, well, that's wrong and must be, stamped out. And that's the vision that a Harris Walz ticket would bring to America. They'll take the Minnesota model and just export it to the whole country.
Ben, you're the expert on the Minnesota model. Wrap this up for us.
I mean, save us from that, please. I love Minnesota. The organizations I work with, we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people we communicate with, tens of thousands of members. And I love them. And we love our state, right? It's being destroyed by these people. It's a matter of percentages, right? If you have one black woman sitting on the edge of Lake Street, bawling her eyes out on camera because they burned her Walgreens to the ground, and now she's saying, I don't know where I'm going to get my groceries. I don't know how I can feed my family. They've destroyed the whole neighborhood, and the only place I could go to get the medicine that I needed or the groceries that I needed has been destroyed. You know what? Walz is okay. If there's just one black woman over here bawling her eyes out, her life's been destroyed, as long as the message gets out to the rest of them, all of his egalitarian BS. And if he can still win elections, if he can still keep up his public image, that's all the man cares about. And you mentioned, Elizabeth, about how can you sit there and call your state racist when they vote for you? That's part of the strategy. If I follow all the media sites in Minnesota, have for a decade, it is a nonstop white guilt trip. Nonstop. Every single day, articles coming out to make you feel bad about the color of your skin, your privilege, your income, where you live, where you came from, feel guilty about your ancestors or somebody who could have been your ancestors. You should feel guilty, 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 guilty. And it is an actual strategy that actually brings out mid-centrist and left-wing white people to vote blue no matter who, because then I can atone for being so racist because my grandparents were white and I happen to be white too. It is a strategy. It's working. And Minnesota has been torched by it, on top of just mass waves of they call it immigration. It's not immigration. This is an invasion into the state. Republicans paid for it. Democrats paid for it. And they hauled in hundreds of thousands of people from countries all over the world, Yemen, Somalia. They moved them
great.
to Minnesota.
Few
one of the largest
in there.
contingents of the Muslim population in the country, and it's turned the state blue. And if you say one word about your neighborhood, drug needles all over the ground, if you say one word about the crime or the fact that your children can't even go outside and play in the yard anymore.
Do you have no-go zones there yet, Ben?
I don't think they're official, but they're pretty much official.
Well, no, I mean,
people just don't.
They never, even in France, they don't call them no-go zones. There's special, zones or something. But
there's absolutely portions of Minneapolis that you just don't go to. Nobody goes to. Nobody goes to it. And I'll tell you this real quick. I've actually never told this story before. I'll say it now. In January of 2023, I have 4 little boys, and they're playing out in the front yard in the snow in our rented townhouse that we lived in. The townhouse beside ours, so not connected, but the one kind of property space over, was owned by the city that we lived in, the city of Northfield. And they used that house as a refugee resettlement home. And they brought in a family from the Sudan, brought them in there, let them live there. And in January, the woman comes walking out the front of the house, walks over to my 2-year-old son who's playing in the snow. She's got a big stick in her hand, and she starts jabbing him in the face, knocks him over in the snow, turns around and walks away. My oldest son comes in the house, mommy, the neighbor just hit Enoch. And we had it all on camera. She didn't speak hardly a lick of English, but this house is owned by the city. This is how it's just going.
Okay, that was like an amazing story, and we just lost it.
And we had Ben drop out. We'll bring Ben back. We'll give him a second here to see if he can come back in.
I was sitting on the edge of my Office Depot chair.
Yeah, well,
I was thinking I don't have one of those big gamer setups.
The story makes me think of how the niceness of a place like Minnesota is exploited by people who are not so nice. As he's telling the story of Governor Walz talking about how racist his own state is, I'm thinking, okay, which side of the Civil War did Minnesota fight on? Were they were part of the Confederacy, right? They were a slave state, right? Well, obviously not. They were against it. In fact, they were, the people from that state were some of the most vehement abolitionists.
Right.
And,
okay, we got Ben back.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
You got to wrap that story for us.
Passionate, and this is what happens.
Yeah, I'll wrap the story. The woman attacked my 2-year-old. We caught the entire thing on camera because we had put up cameras, and we called the local police department. In the end, long story short, they did not have anybody who spoke her dialect at the local courthouse. They rescheduled hearings for later on, and the city attorney dropped the charges. The city did nothing about these people living in the house next to us. The police did nothing, even though we had camera footage of her attacking my 2-year-old who was playing out on our yard in the snow. And it became very, very clear to me and my family that this is the state that Tim Walz wants. This is what you're supposed to live with. There's no justice. And this is happening to people all over the state where there are protected classes of people. And if you don't like it, again, you are a far-right extremist racist, and you need to get with the program.
Ben, don't you think that part of this, of course, actually, this is kind of going down the rabbit hole of Islamic immigration. But I will say this. I mean, obviously, Minnesota, whose governor is Walz, has welcomed this, has put this kind of immigration on steroids. They want refugee resettlement in smaller cities, changing the demographics of the city and obliterating the history and culture of a city. But what your Somali lady, which I would have had a tough time not taking a stick and taking her head off with it, but that reminds me of the ethic of these barbarians coming from these third world nations with religions or cultures that cannot understand the Western ideals that we all hold to be true. When we bring them in and they commit heinous crimes, and your son could have ended up dead if under, a slightly different scenario. But in England, for instance, this is happening all over the world, or Europe, when a Muslim man raped a 13-year-old girl in the UK, was allowed to walk free because he didn't know rape was illegal. He didn't know raping a 13-year-old little girl against her will was illegal. And this is the kind of social disunity and chaos and anarchy that the communists like Kamala and Tim Walz want to bring into our states, because they want to burn our Constitution and culture to the ground so they can rebuild and put a new regime in.
Yes. Introduce the chaos, introduce the unraveling of our culture, and then you as the state, the God state, becomes the solution to the
We're
problem.
here to save you.
Right? We're here to save you. Also, if you want to be saved, you have to give up your guns. If you want to have a gun, you're insane. We are a civilized society. We only let people attack kids with sticks. You cannot have guns.
I'll just keep my knives instead of my guns.
Oh yeah,
I'm fine.
That's where we're going to take your guns away while we simultaneously make the culture that you live in as unsafe as humanly possible. So you cry out for aid, you cry out for justice, and then the state steps in to decide what they want to do next. And Tim Walz has been nothing but the bane of existence on so many everyday Minnesotans. Life has not been good in Minnesota for a lot of people because of the Walz policies, because of the lack of justice. And I shudder legitimately to think that this could possibly be the case across our country. And again, there's nobody I know, and this is props to Walz in the worst way. There's nobody I know who can sell a bad idea better than Tim Walz. His whole everything during COVID, you wanted to believe every word he said simply because of the way he looked, the way he talked, his facial expressions, his feigned frustration about I hate to have to spin this dial back, but we have to do. We got to love our neighbors. We got to love our neighbors. And while he shoves this tyranny down your throat, I can't imagine what Tim Walz could do as a vice president, calling people into his office to twist their arm in the best Tim Walz way to do things that they shouldn't do or don't want to do. It would be very bad for our country. And
well, think of this nightmare. Think of this nightmare. If Trump will win if it's a free and fair election, that's a guarantee. I know that's true. Well, okay, if it were a free and fair election, if no illegal or dead people voted, if all the voter rolls were clean and all the rest, I believe Trump would win handily. But what I will say is this, the dark side is this, 8 years of Kamala Harris followed by 8 years of Tim Walz. Because once Kamala takes office, if that happens, they will, within 100 days, have laid the foundation to prevent any Republican ever taking the White House again and having a one-party government. So this is the most existential race in history. And I saw somebody the other day saying that Donald Trump is going to be the most important president in history, even besides Washington, because what we're facing today is, Washington was playing patty cake compared to us playing, Dungeons and Dragons, I guess.
Guys, I'm going to interrupt here so we can move on to the next segment. The next segment, this is kind of the purpose of this episode, is the real risk of a Kamala Walz ticket and it winning. Are we fully prepared for that? And as an example, the media machine has done a superb job of astroturfing Walz and Kamala. Just as I mentioned in the beginning, Kamala was just kind of like the dreaded candidate of even the left, and now she's beloved. And it seems like in just this short period of time, so many things have been memory hold. They constantly push down the Trump assassination, which was just recently here. We even have new footage now of the cops hoisting each other onto the roof. We've almost completely forgotten that this insane moment took place. And that's because the machine has been at full speed, memory holding everything. We're going to show this quick clip that's just come out of the police officers running up to the side of the building where the shooter was on top and hoisting one up to see him. One thing that's very strange about this section of the video is there's no audio on the camera. And actually, no one's explained why that is quite yet, because you'll see at this point, he's up and he sees the shooter and he immediately drops down and he looks like they're running. He's going to run to his vehicle for what I believe is his rifle. And then he's going to go back to the clip. At that point, the audio comes back to the clip, which is a little strange. And you see them. And by this time, the shooter has been
It's a lot of strange.
It's a lot of strange.
Every email, every voicemail, all of these things are always corrupted. Tens of thousands of emails suddenly corrupted. The video from the pipe bomber on January 6th, corrupted. Or his phone records, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Brian, go.
Well, regarding all the ambiguities around the story of the assassination attempt, I really see two possibilities. Either there's some sort of conspiracy, whether to have instigated the attack in the first place, or just to cover it up because of all the problems, or maybe it's just this is the competence of our country now, that things don't work the way they should, and they often don't. It's just that it's cases like this that really shine a light on it. And if we were to dig into other events, maybe it would be as crazy there as well. I really don't know. I don't have experience within the Secret Service or the FBI, so I can't say whether or not this is normal or this is some sort of cover-up attempt, but it certainly doesn't look good either way.
Ben, your thoughts?
Why are we just seeing this footage now?
Yeah, it's true.
Right?
Why? Yeah, that's a great question.
Trump gets shot. The left all comes out and does their gratuitous, we don't believe in any of this. Violence has no place in America. It's why we want to ban guns. And they do that for as long as they need to, and then very quickly push past. Why does it take weeks and weeks now for this kind of footage to come out? So by the time anybody sees this, most people go, this is old hat. Like we've seen this, we've been over it. We know how far away he was from the president, yada yada. Like, why should we really care? That's what
he survived after all.
Right. He
no
survived. New details emerge. That's yesterday's news. We're on to today. And that part is very intentional, in my opinion.
It's managed media. It's a managed news.
Withhold it as long as possible. Release it later when nobody cares, but at least you can't be accused of holding information, and just push on past. And Trump's star never shone brighter than in that moment when he held his fist up and said, "Fight, fight, fight." And then in the days that followed, and now it's Kamala. She's so amazing. She's so fantastic. She's the best. Forget about Trump. And I believe that we're in a really tough place. Coming into November, things are shifting, maybe not in a good way. And I think that all of this is controlled media when it comes to that camera footage. And honestly, I lived through, I was born in the 90s, and I've seen enough in my lifetime that would tell me, don't believe the official story, because the official story is usually protecting somebody who's official. And so I don't buy the narrative. Most people don't buy the narrative. And now they're just pushing. Now they're pushing the stuff late in the game. That's intentional.
Guys, I want to throw this out. Don't we have a president named Joe Biden at this very moment? Where is he? Back in the basement? Where is Joe Biden at this moment?
Don't ask me.
Nobody knows.
If you treat Kamala like she's already president, then she will be president. That's the idea. Forget about Joe. The media doesn't care about Joe. The left, Obama, Hillary, nobody cares about Joe anymore. Let's just move on to Kamala, treat her like she's already president, and maybe we can will this or cheat this or however you want to do it into existence in November. It's all part of the programming.
I want to go back to that Elijah Schaffer tweet real quick. Let's pull that up. So essentially he's responding. He says, correct take. As a Trump voter, I have no idea why his campaign is intentionally trying to lose traction when we need it most. They tried to kill him, then successfully buried the story in weeks. Now it's all Kamala is a brat, and the Dems I know are pumped. And I'm seeing the same thing. This goes back to how we even started this segment. The machine is working. Americans are distracted. Brian, I see you wanting to say something. Go.
I would push back a little bit on this. Those of us who are online a lot and interact with others online, both on the left and the right, I think sometimes we get an exaggerated sense of where things are going in the real world. And this, the Kamala hype train has been almost entirely online. Now, sure, Democrats are going to support her. People who are already never Trump in the real world are going to support her, and they'll, manufacture some enthusiasm. But you look at the state polls, it's Trump is still leading in most of the swing states, and the ones he's not is still very close within the margin of error. They're going to have their convention, which will probably give them a bit of a bump. We're going to have debates, and by the time early voting starts, I think we'll see things settle down a bit.
Let's
remember,
look
at this time 4
sorry.
years ago, Biden was leading in the polls by 5, 6, 7, 10 points, and now they're essentially even in the national polls. So obviously polls aren't everything. The only poll that matters is the ones that happens on election day and days following. But I don't know. I want to caution against too much blackpilling. I think things are okay. The Trump campaign is, perhaps they need to get out there a bit more, but I know he's doing a rally today just up the road from me over in Montana, helping out Tim Sheehy over there running for Senate against John Tester. So there's, they're doing things. And, I think we need to do our part to, instead of focusing on whatever the Kamala campaign is doing, whatever the media is doing, continue to remind people that Trump was shot 3 weeks ago, that, and the way he responded to that and his actual plan for once he wins. If obviously the material damage to our country, if Harris and Walz win, is going to be uncountable, but even worse, is going to put the nail in the coffin of any sense that we as voters have a choice. Already in 2020, we see how they put their thumb on the scale. That whole Time magazine shadow campaign to save the 2020 election. It shows that there are people who are not just voters who are letting their influence be known. It's big tech, it's the media, it's the political machines in these big Democrat cities. And if they do that again, when we know that not only is Harris unpopular, Walz is a joke, the unprecedented nature of replacing your party's nominee, the incumbent president, this close to the election. It's never happened before. If, despite all that, she wins with 100 million votes, then I think any remaining patriotic Americans who still have any semblance of trust in the system, it's going to be gone.
And then what, Brian? What, I don't want to, that's the black pill answer that I want to entertain a little bit. Ben, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, people have to feel like they're being heard. People have to feel like they're being listened to, and that action is being taken on what they desire. Just going back to where we are, electorally, July when Trump got shot, it's not November. In August, where the things are on a bit of a lull here, I would say, it's also not November. What happens in November is what happens. But if you get a country, we look what's happening in France right now. We look what's happening in Great Britain. If you get a country where people feel like they're being completely ignored and like their vote doesn't matter, you open up the door for the total downfall of America in ways we've seen in countries across the world throughout the generations, throughout the last couple thousand years. That's what America will be facing if you take away people's ability to call their own shots, make their own destiny, be independent, make a living, own their firearms, make their choices that affect their lives the most. But if you become too big, too bad, too terrible, too powerful, as the government has is basically where it's at right now, and you take away the ability for people to switch out that government through the elections process that our founding fathers put in place for us, you're looking at a really, really, really bad situation in America, and which is, again, a part of the whole gun grab, gun control narrative. We need to get guns out of the hands of Americans. And that's why my full-time work is, protecting the Second Amendment with the American Firearms Association, Minnesota Gun Rights, because that is the last line of defense if the whole ethos of America goes in the wrong direction, and I pray it does not.
Elizabeth, I'd love to know your thoughts on this.
Well, I know that the Democrat Party is run by liars. Just flat out, it's run by liars. I have seen so many posts that are meant to demoralize Republicans, people who love America, people who love God and His holy word, people who love families and faith and freedom and the Constitution and will defend it with their lives. Those people are being fed false stories like, I don't have it up here right now, but I was just reading it last night, that Trump doesn't have any organization in his campaign. There's only one office in Nevada. Harris' campaign has, 2 dozen, 3, 4 dozen, whatever huge lie it was, and went through a few different states like this. And the reality is it was entirely false. Everything about, when I first saw the headline, I looked at it, I thought, what? This is crazy. That can't be true. And it wasn't true. But many, many people, Republicans, conservatives, MAGA, will believe that and become demoralized if we allow that to happen. So yes, doomer. I know, Josh, that you're a doomer, and I really empathize with that. But I do believe that it's part of a coordinated campaign as well. It's like having Kamala speak to hundreds or thousands of people, and they're there to see 3 half-naked girls twerk, right? They're not really there to see the Kamala, okay? And so what we have to do is see what the Republican Party is really doing. They're putting thousands upon, like 100,000 poll watchers out there. There are state coordinating campaigns that they are changing laws, and they are putting people with real boots on the ground, no stolen valor here. And I think that there's a lot of reason to hope. What I think we should all be talking about or reminding people over and over and over again is Charlie Kirk's turning point strategy is to go out and get Republicans, Christians, MAGA, conservatives, whatever, get those people to actually register to vote. Can you imagine how many patriotic, American-loving people who are eligible to vote, citizens who are eligible to vote, are not even registered, let alone that they don't get out of bed or don't leave their office because they're so busy, I'm really busy, and go and vote. They just say, well, my vote won't matter. We need to get new Republican voters registered. That's going to save it. And then we have to close the border between
Brian,
now and November.
Excellent point. Brian, go for it.
Yeah, I was thinking of a couple of the things that Elizabeth and Ben were saying. Ben mentioned what's going on in other countries like Britain with these riots of people who have been unheard, whose government has essentially declared them enemies of their country. And I was thinking, who's the head of state of that country? It's King Charles. Does he have an ounce of courage or the ability to stand up for his people? No, he is literally a figurehead for not just the country, but for the regime that's ruling the country that has declared his own people the enemies. But he's not standing up for them. And so that's our choice in America. We have a choice between someone like Trump, who will stand up for us. In his first inaugural address, he said that the forgotten men and women of America will be forgotten no more. Or we have a choice between someone like Harris and Walz, who are willing and able and excited to be figureheads for a regime that hates the people of America and wants to replace them with a different people. And that's a stark choice.
Beautifully said, Brian.
Absolutely. So,
Very well
guys, I
done.
want to use this moment to segue over. We're talking about knowing more and understanding what's going on. And for that, we're going to promote Whistleblower, our special report over at WorldNet Daily. This is an in-depth report on God, Trump, America, and the Democrats' all-out plan to steal the 2024 election. We know they're going to try. We know they're going to try just about everything. And we have no idea what's next. And we want to say, if you want to know more, go check out the Whistleblower Report. It's an excellent resource to in-depth editorial thought on what's actually going on.
It's
And a
not only
reminder-
that. Let me put it this way. Whistleblower is like 26, 27 years old. And oh gosh, I remember those early days. We were in the backwoods of Oregon when Whistleblower first started being produced. And it's every month for 26, 27 years. It's a special report. It is not a magazine. It's not a news magazine. It's a special report. David Kupelian, who is our the publisher and editor of Whistleblower, has a deep sense. He's a brilliant author, wrote the Marketing of Evil and other follow-up books to that. He's brilliant. And what he does is weave the spiritual with the terrestrial or the physical, what we're experiencing today, every day in America and around the world, and the forces of evil versus the forces of good. So WND, WorldNet Daily rather, has always been a news organization that did not marginalize faith as if that was something you do on Shabbat or Sunday. No. It's interwoven in everything we say or do, as it should be. And the left, of course, interweaves their religion in everything they do without calling themselves, liberal or anything else like that. So, yeah, this is a very special edition, and our next month's edition is going to be amazing. I won't tease it right now, but get a subscription now to Whistleblower, and you'll have this. The biggest special report we've ever produced is coming out next month.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Guys, we thank you so much for watching this episode. We want you to be informed, and we've kind of thrown out this threat. Kamala can win. That's absolutely true, and we need all of us to stay as I stutter. We need to stay informed. One way we'd love you to do that is to go over to worldnetdaily.com and follow us, especially on Rumble. It's WND Newsroom at Rumble. Follow us there. We're going to have all our videos on X, WorldNet Daily on X. Also, we have a Facebook and a YouTube, but the clock is ticking on how much censorship will be there. So we really prefer X and Rumble. And we thank you for watching. We thank you to Ben for being on the show. We love it. We'll have him back. Elizabeth, of course, and Brian Ullman. And we hope you guys have a fantastic weekend. And we thank you for watching.